welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke, ranging from comics, movies, TV, video games, and more. I'm Daniel, and your other host this week to help out on the Zack Snyder Rebel Moon episode. We also have some Godzilla impressions at the very end, is Millennial Mike. Welcome back, Millennial.
You timed this, didn't you?
Did I?
No. But it's good timing, though. It's impeccable.
It's very good timing, yeah. It worked out because there is a lot to discuss here. It was enough to where I'm like, all right, here's a little bit of Zack news here. Here's a Rebel Moon trailer. I almost did one for just the Rebel Moon trailer, but this time I'm like, all right, there's a lot going on here, especially with that. Well, there was the teaser that we got a few months back, and then Netflix released the official trailer 3 weeks ago. And that's when I was like, maybe I should do an episode just on the trailer. But
gotcha. Okay.
Now with these premieres in Brazil and these screenings that he's having, there's more information. That's where that Stuber episode or quote came out that we're going to discuss. But first, if this is your first episode of the podcast, the way we format it is we are inspired by a news article or a review, something that just came out, and we discuss it right here on the show this week. The focus being Zack Snyder, and again, a little impression on the new Godzilla film. So Zack Snyder, despite his involvement in launching the sci-fi fantasy film Rebel Moon on Netflix, is remaining busy, keeping busy with other upcoming projects. And one project is Blood and Ashes, which was originally conceived as a sequel to 300, which you recently saw for the first time. But he transformed it into a unique story focusing on the gay love affair between Alexander the Great and his second-in-command, Hephaestion. So initial rejection by Warner Brothers, classic WB, not the only project they've rejected of Zack's. But along with his producing partner, Deborah Snyder, they now have the rights back and are considering shopping it elsewhere. So in contrast, Snyder's adaptation of this other comic book by Howard Chaykin, who I do love, he is controversial. Anytime he's on Word Balloon, he says shit that's like, that could infuriate people, which is what I love about him. But the comic book is called Black Kiss. That one is no longer in play due to the controversy behind it. So that's something that the studio, whoever was in charge of releasing it initially, is no longer interested. And Zack acknowledged these challenges because it does feature a transgender female, religious satire, explicit content, which other studios do not want to touch. So these two projects that are coming up, did you have interest on seeing these as what they're going to be now is original projects? Blood and Ashes will no longer be tied into 300, and same with this Howard Chaykin comic. Although if that does get made, it sounds like it'll be an adaptation.
So I don't know anything about either of these. I heard them because I know he's working on a lot of different projects. There's an animated project with like the Greek gods. There's that one. And
yeah, Twilight of the Gods.
That was kind of been in a weird spot. You know, I don't know what he's doing with that. But yeah, he's always going to have like these projects he's wanted. Remember the Fountainhead? Where's that one go? You know,
that's what got people calling him a Randian or whatever.
Yeah, you know, the thing is that I've always liked the idea that Zack Snyder would be the director to helm controversial and challenging movies and projects and be the one to be able to pull it off. Right. I like that idea. Now, I think the only time that really came to fruition was probably with Watchmen and to a lesser extent, you know, his DC movies. But as far as these are concerned, and I also felt like that would be the case as well with the Fountainhead as well, which kind of just got canned. And he says like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen. They're not going to let me do it.
Axed it, really?
Yeah. Well, I from what I remember, it was that Warner Brothers cut the project or something. You might have to correct me on that one, but it wasn't due to his own desire that movie didn't come to fruition, from what I remember. But I think it was a similar situation as this Blood and Ashes situation is, but yeah, no, I mean, in either case, I mean, I really don't know. 300 was really good. I don't know. So the way that you actually described this here, let me see if I'm reading the notes properly. Something about like super homoerotic, like Like, I don't know if that's my wheelhouse.
not even if Zach's doing it.
Honestly, the Rebel Moon trailer, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and I posted a little bit about this, and you kind of responded a little bit to it. It has me concerned, and those concerns haven't really been allayed since the first trailer came out, even with the second trailer so much. And the whole thing we're going to talk about today, or the angle we're going to take on it today, I have some nuanced opinions on that, but that doesn't necessarily help either. So I don't know. And as far as this whole Black Kiss thing, I don't know what it's about. I mean, what is it about?
I don't know the actual story. I never read Black Kiss, but they mainly touch on those controversial themes, essentially the whys behind how it wasn't a sellable project. He had a quote here that said on The Hollywood Reporter, quote, "No one wanted to make it. It was too weird. We really went for it too," end quote. And that kind of ties into that other thing Zach said of when he got hired on to do Man of Steel, BVS, the Snyder Cut, that he was saying that he was out there to he loves the characters, he wants to celebrate him, but if they wanted a product, that he was the wrong guy for it. That's kind of the way he looks back on it. They wanted someone that would create products out of this. It was back and forth, a lot of push and pull, and I'm sure some of these things, like including the vehicles more or the different bat suits, were probably studio mandates because they want different designs of the characters to sell the toys of. They most famously, Batman Returns did a lot of that. And so did Batman and Robin, when they're like, okay, you got to have each one has their own bat vehicle, Batgirl has her own and all that. And it was all to sell more toys. And as he was saying, he is not the guy for that.
Yeah. When I look back and I think about what I like about Zack Snyder, is a few different things. And everyone has their own reasons, their own specific reasons for why they like his work. But I could probably nail it down to a few things. His men are very masculine. His women are very feminine. He's got like this machismo about everything he does. It's very explosive and aggressive and gritty and it has like an edge to it, so I like that. His audio and visual experience is always great. The picture looks good. The images, the symbolism, he really enjoys symbolism. The music is always really good in almost all of his work, whether it's just a straight up soundtrack or whether it's more of your score. It's always really good no matter what. He gets good people on like Zimmer and Junkie XL. He is willing to see a lot of directors nowadays are what I would call postmodern. So they're trying to always deconstruct. And I think that Zack Snyder is definitely postmodern. But I also think that he likes to bring things back together and come to some kind of affirmative vision at the end. So that way you're left with something more than what you had at the beginning. And I think a lot of directors like Rian Johnson and other, directors who many people would lump with Zack Snyder as quote unquote hacks, which I don't agree with necessarily. I think that that's the difference between Zack Snyder and other directors. I like that he throws you for a loop. He does subvert expectations. That's a very divisive word, but he does subvert expectations, but he gives you something more than what you expected, something that you wanted, but you didn't know that you want. Exactly. And that's what I think the magic of Zack Snyder is, my personal opinion.
Yeah, he makes these things that even us as Snyder fans and that have seen almost all of his films, I still haven't seen the zombie one, Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead, but even some people like us that know his films so well we're going to watch Rebel Moon, and there'll be portions of that will still be taken aback by, things that we'll be surprised by, things that we're probably, if you look at it from a cinematic standpoint, like, oh, I've never seen, or I haven't seen something like that in a long time, or I've never seen anything like that in another film. So that's kind of the nice thing about it is, you're not going to get the okay, well, it's a Zack Snyder film, I know more or less what to expect. It's going to be something new, something on a rewatch. They say his films age like wine, better on the rewatches. You just discover more and more. And knowing him, he packs them with all kinds of stuff, all kinds of Easter eggs too.
Yeah. Well, I have more to say about this when it comes to Rebel Moon specifically, but I have concerns about Zack Snyder. I love his work and I think he's a really cool guy and I would love to get to know him. And I have positive, good faith in him, but I am concerned because, like, especially on this whole rewatch thing you mentioned, that's really true. But I think that there are some things that he's doing, especially in his later films, that are actually causing his films to be less rewatchable than his older films. We can talk more about that, Rebel Moon, if you're interested.
Yeah, we definitely will. The one thing that these two projects that may not happen have gone for them is that Netflix is so far very happy with Zack and the work that he's provided for them. Army of the Dead is a top 10, I believe, performing of all time in a certain metric, right? Like the first week of streaming or whatever it ends up being. I know it's on there. Someone put up the chart this week because we need to get Rebel Moon on there. So we need to make sure we stream it and get it up there. Well, it seems like with Netflix liking Zack's work so much, there might be something more to the DC films, or at least the ones he did previously make. So while his film deal with Netflix remains intact, rumors started circulating about the possibility of Netflix acquiring the rights to Zack's DC films, and this was a notion acknowledged by Netflix's head of film, Scott Stuber. And this was all over online. It blew up on X, on Facebook, because of that bit of hope. And the exact quote was, "That's always tricky because you don't own it. Obviously, we would like to license it at some point. We'd love to have it on so that fans can experience more Zack. The more Zack we have, the better we are," end quote. So people took that as a possibility, as they want in on the SnyderVerse, but that they don't own it. So it's kind of like, we're willing, but we need WB to play ball with us, or whatever it may be. And some people were saying that it was specifically talking about the Snyder Cut. But when I was reading this article, and you have it up on the show notes too, you're able to find it. It seems like, according to this author, they were specifically asking about continuing. That's what it says here, continuing that universe. So they were asked, would you be able to make Justice League 2 and 3 essentially, or make more films with Zack? And his response sounds like it's more or less, we want to, we just need them to sell.
Yeah. With Warner Brothers, they're really a loose cannon. I mean, literally anything can happen, which is, something like that could happen. So yeah, I'm interested in what will happen with that. If Netflix acquired it, you no longer have Warner Brothers issues. You have Netflix issues, like the fact that none of his content is probably ever going to get into a theater where it belongs, or while it may get a large budget, a lot of that budget might not go into the places where you're going to be able to see it. And that's also becoming an increasing issue in the traditional Hollywood model as well. So it's not just Netflix, but I find that a lot of Netflix content looks very Netflixy. And we've talked about this many, many times, but super digital, it just looks kind of cheap and like televisual. And I don't know where to put the finger on. In the past, I've said it's because they have a certain mandate for which cameras you can use to kind of streamline the process with getting it on their platform and everything like that. And I think that process, however it may be, what we know and what maybe some things that we don't know, is causing a lot of their content to look a certain way, which I think doesn't do Zack any justice, in my personal opinion.
And that's one of two criticisms that I saw. And one of which you said, these things belong on the big screen. Someone said, I'd rather not have these movies and have them on the small screen than not have them ever be on the big screen. So they'd rather not have them at all if they see that it's going to be on the small screen. Netflix in the past, they've been willing to release these things, at least in a limited theatrical run. Do you think if they got a big license like the DC universe of characters, even if it's just for 2 films, something like that, you think they would be willing to release as a wide feature, as a wide event? Or do you think they would still want to sell the streaming rights, or the hey, come watch this on Netflix instead?
Yeah, I think Netflix's number one issue is the Netflix jail. That's the, if there's any legitimate criticism toward Netflix, that's the one issue. We sacrificed flexibility, and we sacrificed the scope and the prestige platform of the theatrical run with the traditional studio model for the flexibility that Netflix offers and for the freedom that they give to an extent, their creators. So we sacrifice some of these things, and we're not going to get them back. I know that sounds a little negative, a little skeptical, but we're so familiar. We're painfully familiar with Warner Brothers issues, with the way that they treat their creators and the way that they limit their creativity and things like that. Well, Netflix has an issue, and that's like the whole Netflix jail situation. I mean, what was the last one that they put in theater, even in a limited run, that wasn't for specifically the award seasons, right? Zach's work isn't gonna get in the reward seasons. Most of it isn't. And I don't think it's even aimed for that, really. So I don't think that they're going to even try, honestly.
I think the last one, Army of the Dead, obviously had a limited release. I was able to go locally and go see it. I think it was up for a week. I thought Rebel Moon would be for sure, because Army of the Dead was rated R. And I'm like, okay, that's a smaller audience theoretically. Rebel Moon, you've got your PG-13 cut, and it appeals to sci-fi fans, which is a large base of audience. But even that, they were like, okay, no, we're just going to do a tour and not release this even in a limited capacity. I think it's only in big cities like LA, New York. They're doing like screenings there. But I was kind of shocked that they did not go bigger. And granted, I think it was the theatrical landscape was a little bit different than when Army of the Dead released. Not too much different, but it was still a little bit. But I thought for sure Rebel Moon would have been it. And that's one of those things that I am disappointed in. I think Rebel Moon, more than Army of the Dead, would have lent itself better to a big screen watch. And
they
unfortunately,
supposedly put more money into it as well. Why wouldn't they be more, if they were so trusting and so enthusiastic about it, they would put as much money as they did into it. Why wouldn't they also put it into the theaters as well?
That's what surprises me. They have a fucking Times Square ad right now. Like, they dumped a lot of money into this. They're doing figurines, merchandise, a comic book, art books, novels, and it's like, why not the theater though? Why are they stopping short of that?
Well, Netflix is basically, and it's not a great, by all accounts, it's not a great comparison, but the point that I'm making is they're basically the Disney of streaming. Like, they're more Disney than Disney is at streaming. Like, they're the top dog. They're the ones who set the narrative, and their wheelhouse is streaming. They're not really going to. Another thing too is, if they put it in theaters, they're going to create a precedent, an expectation that the movies go to theaters, even if it doesn't actually pay them out at the end. So that might be a costly precedent to set. If I'm thinking like they are, like, oh, they made this big thing in theaters, maybe they'll do my thing in theaters, and unless they're willing to go full all in on that, which they probably don't want to, they want to keep it as a rare like thing where people weren't really expecting it, because then it's not like a negative thing. Like, oh, now they make this great thing that comes out, and when it's not in theaters, people are like, oh, are they not confident in it? The whole narrative changes,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's a good point. The other thing I saw that was like against this possibility of Netflix wanting this is, okay, that they can want it all they want, but Warner Brothers is never going to let go of their properties like this. And I think there's a misunderstanding there where people believe that it's something like selling the DC characters over. It's just a licensing to use the characters. It's not that their Netflix can now exclusively own them like Sony does with Spider-Man. It would not be that kind of deal. Instead, it would be, okay, we're going to license these characters for these two films. What's the money that we're talking about here, and how we're going to break down the merchandising rights? And then you go from there. I think Warner Brothers Discovery, the only thing that would keep them from it, because they want the money. They're not doing well, and they need to keep stockholders happy. But the only other thing I could think of would be pettiness, just out of sheer, we don't want to admit that we're wrong, which we've seen in the past with other players that are no longer in the game. But they were willing to say, no, we'd rather lose millions than admit we were wrong. And that could be the same case with Zaslav as well.
This is the eternal question. We've been asking this question time and time and time again, you and I. And it's just, oh, is it because of pettiness? Is it because of pride, or this or that? Are we going to personify this company and give them like, a sense of pride that they have? I mean, if they really had pride, they would make changes that actually increase their optics, but they aren't, maybe it's ideology sometimes, because that would make you continue to do something regardless of the optics, you know. It can't just be pride, you know. And we've seen complete regime changes. It's like, okay, who's falling on the sword now? Whose pride is being hurt? You know, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to be right to me. I think that it's probably far more complicated or far more simple than we even know, and we'll probably just never know it until everything goes straight to hell and and we get to get like a retrospect on something, you know, a documentary on why it all went down.
Yeah, and I'm excited for that day. we need that part of the documentary too, or like the dramatization of what happened. And we need that day that the Exiles Network put out the news about Ray Porter, and we need someone to play Millennial Mike. We need someone to play all these other.
You know, I know a guy who's he looks just like Millennial Mike. I mean, he's like spot on,
like an actor.
I mean, maybe I'll ask him. Turns around, whispers behind his own shoulder. Actually, he says he's willing to play.
Yeah, that'll be a good day. And hopefully we'll find that answer. At least we know that they're willing to license out the characters. We saw that they did it with Amazon and the recent Batman show. And I think they made a deal with them where they could create cartoons or TV shows. I forgot what the deal was. So now they're starting to get into the seller's market, which is good because they're hurting. They let go of that Godzilla license, which is definitely for the better. I think this last movie might be it for them. I don't know what the deal was. I think it was 5 films.
Mm-hmm.
But at least we're getting closer to that possibility of someone else wanting the license, someone else buying them. It could be that the Universal deal happens before any of this. And then at the end, it could be that eventually none of it comes to fruition and we're instead enjoying, Blood and Ashes in 6 years if it gets made.
Honestly, the thing that I'm most interested, I won't say excited about seeing, but the thing I'm most interested in seeing is seeing Zack Snyder fans get what they say that they want and see how they respond. You know, see if they have a nuanced response, if they have how positive the response is, or if they actually have a mixed or even negative response. I mean, we've always been accused of being a cult because we always kind of hive mind, so as they say, or we have like this kind of narrative that we always say, and we don't really have individual opinions, quote unquote. But I don't want that opinion to be affirmed, you know? Like if we actually get the last 2 movies, and we actually get this from Zack and that from Zack, you know, are we going to just hear the usual suspects just say how this is his next best thing every single time? I mean, I accuse other people of doing that. I wouldn't want that to be the case for myself either. So, I mean, I just want to see like interesting discussion about Zack, how his work and how he has evolved as an artist. You know, so many people talk about Zack's work as it's like descending from like the heavens or something like that. Like it doesn't come from a person who has his own positives and negatives, and he changes with time and things like that. No one really talks about Zack's style and work from that perspective. So it'd be really interesting to have more discussion in that way, in my personal opinion.
It might be something that we could revisit, especially once Rebel Moon comes out and we can review it and discuss it and maybe dive deeper into what he did with the movie, and maybe then go back and compare it to some of his previous work, especially seeing as how now it's not part of a license, it's its own. I don't know. I think it's going to be. I think
that's
we'll
how
have a lot more
Army of the Dead
was.
Out.
Yeah,
that's how Army of the Dead was. And he actually, didn't he help? He directed it. Didn't he help write it? And he shot it.
Yeah.
And he produced it. So he had so much work on it. Like if that, and of course, what was it? Sucker Punch. Those kinds of movies, I think, represent Zack's sensibilities the most. And I think those are the movies that we actually probably talk about the least.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, let's talk about the upcoming Rebel Moon trailer, which I know you definitely had some thoughts on.
It's a new age for the universe.
And I'm glad that all this came out, because I did want to talk about the trailer. I almost thought we wouldn't before the actual movie releases in, a week and a half or 2 weeks from this release.
Mm-hmm.
But some people are calling it's got a female protagonist. It's got a diverse cast, just like Army of the Dead did. It had a diverse cast, had strong female characters. They're calling it Woke Moon. They're calling it Woke Moon. Is this the film to be calling woke, though? I mean, this is where I have my own thoughts on this, but I know you had some stuff to say on Discord, and I want you to expand on that here.
This is a great question. I definitely fall into a category which I would call myself, woke critical or even anti-woke.
Mm-hmm.
I follow a lot of people on YouTube and other voices like yours podcast that also take this kind of stance, but none of them are pro Zack. I'm pro Zack, right? So my opinion on this is very interesting. I mean, I hope it is, at least. I would say, if I'm trying to lend some credence to what people's concerns are, I would say that yes, it is worth listening to what they have to say. And if they can articulate it with any amount of nuance, then it's worth, considering it. I think that the term woke, and we haven't really talked a ton about this on this show, but for lack of a better term, isn't in itself a binary term. Like, a lot of people say, oh, it's either woke or it's not. Like, because I think a lot of people conflate the word woke with like bad, know? Whereas like, I think that something can be woke to a lesser or greater degree. And I think the underlying idea is to kind of upend traditional ideas of identity, starting with sex and then family, by subverting and decentralizing them, right? So movies have been woke for a long time, and we've liked them. I think that the strong female protagonist has been around for a long time, and we've enjoyed it, and we've found it to be completely acceptable. And I still think that is inherently woke, and not in like a derogatory way, but just as a neutral, like, yeah, that's what it is kind of way. But I think there was a period in time where Hollywood saw that people liked it, right? And they took the wrong lessons for it. Maybe because they wanted to take the wrong lessons, or maybe because it was out of ignorance or something like that. Like, there was a time with strong female characters, the femme fatale, things like that. And the reason I believe this is the case and people enjoyed that stuff is because, especially males who make up a massive amount of the spending audience for entertainment, action movies and blockbusters, they like to see the female aesthetic. They like to see the female, attractive female on the screen, and they still want guns shooting, swords slashing, flips being done, action taking place. So if you can have a female doing that, in their mind, we're just like, hey, that's cool. I get to look at a female and then see the things I want to see. And the movie's not like trying to actually put any sort of gender or any of that like into it. They kind of just make that all ambiguous, to the extent where I can enjoy the things that I actually care about. Whereas Hollywood's like, oh, we have to have this make a actual real time social commentary statement on it. And when they started doing that more and more and taking away like, oh, well, males like that the female is attractive and then she's kind of sexy or whatever. We need to take that out because we don't want that audience. We don't want that aesthetic, those optics. And they started taking away all the things that we like of, woke 1.0 version 1 or whatever. They took those things out, and now we have this later version that has all the things that we don't like or don't care for, and none of the things that we do. So I explain all that, and that brings me to the actual trailer, which is that this is woke. You have, your short-haired, militant, strong female lead, right? And from what I can tell, like, you could pretty much exchange her character for a man and it wouldn't really actually change the story much. She had a romantic relationship in the past, according to the trailer, but she's past that now. So there's not really any traditional femininity in this character at all. And it's kind of just a swap out for all intents and purposes. But at one time, we would have been fine with that. And this trailer looks pretty, bad behind it. It looks pretty sick. So I think that, there are a lot of people who are overreacting, and they're so sensitive to things because the pendulum has flipped so much. Right. The reaction has gone so great that, and the thing is that a lot of these people, when Zack was really giving an affirmative picture of traditional masculinity and an affirmative picture of traditional femininity, people were rejecting that.
Mhm.
So it's like, I think that people really don't like Zack, and they're using whatever tools. When when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. So I think that's kind of another aspect of this whole conversation. Enough of my rambling. I'll go into it more, but
they were exactly calling him sexist, and it happened more recently with the Snyder Cut with the Amazonians, how they were showing more skin than the ones in the Wonder Woman film and things like. So they're calling him sexist because of that and all that other stuff. So either way he swings, or whatever the movie is, whatever they perceive it to be, they're going to use that as a weapon, as you were saying. I'm glad you brought up the comparison to the older quote unquote wokeness that we would see in some other films. And, that makes me think of what was going on Discord, of where something like Alien by Ridley Scott was written, Ripley, just the character's name right there. And when the studio, because if you had called the character like Ellen Ripley and put that right in the script, they would have been like, no, we don't want a female protagonist. That's not going to sell as much, or whatever the objection might be. Back then, it was like no, you need a male guy, that the male lead is going to bring in audiences. And so casting Sigourney Weaver in this role as the main protagonist, with a script being written, as you said, where you don't know inherently if it's a male or female by the fact that it's written in a certain way, because there's nothing inherently in the character that says, okay, it's not like Aliens where she's a mom, lost her kid, and now is a super mom by taking on this adoptive kid and goes up against the other angry super mom, which was the Xenomorph Queen. In the first movie, she's just trying to survive. And that was artist driven. That was writer driven. And I think now you pointed that out really well. It seems like it's all studio driven, at least when it's done. In my opinion, when it's not done well, is where the studio has these check boxes and it's like, okay, we need to make sure we have these in that movie so that we don't get criticized for not being woke enough. And I think when it's not genuine, audiences can see it, or at least it seems that way. At least I feel like I can tell when I see something that it's not genuine. And that's when I take it as a negative. That's where I will use it. And I don't use the word too often, but that's where I might, say, oh, go woke, go broke, or whatever just something to incite a reaction.
Yeah. And on that same subject about, I guess, whether it's coming from the studio or whether it's coming from the artist, like in my opinion, and from my perspective, if something interests me or if something doesn't interest me, then the real truth underneath it, if I'm being completely honest with myself, is that I'm not really going to be too concerned on whether that thing was created by a studio or whether it was created by an artist, although in principle, I would like to believe that the artist is the one driving the ship at the end of the day. There have been some kind of like studio mandated things that I liked because it kind of just, tickled some certain sensibilities that I had. But I found that the great majority of things that I've enjoyed have been from people who I connect with, like directors who have sensibilities like mine, or at least can capture that pretty well, And I think that with Zack, I feel like my sensibilities and his are diverging as he gets older and changes, and as he's gone through his ups and downs throughout life, and the kinds of things that he wants to make. What he's made is changing. So like we're talking about the trailer now, and it's interesting to see because it's like, okay, he made Sucker Punch back in the day, and a lot of people called that, well, they call that everything. But I always looked at Sucker Punch and I was like, yeah, this is pretty, like, I don't know, but feminist, like 1.0, 1.5 or whatever. Like it's like the earlier, more nuanced version of the ideology or whatever. And it just uses, I guess, some over the top aesthetics to get people of different stripes into the theater. I mean, it looks cool. I mean, they're swinging katanas around, doing slow motion, like machine guns and robots and android samurais. It's cool, but I feel like now, see, like, I actually don't know why Rebel Moon wouldn't be more appealing to a more mass audience than his older stuff was, because his older stuff is a little too much for a lot of the sensitive types, But this movie seemed a lot friendlier, You know, it's like the bad guy is obviously the bad guy, and he looks like what a modern bad guy would look like. And the protagonist looks like what a modern protagonist would look like. And it still looks kind of cool. There's still a lot of action, a lot of CG and monsters and aliens and stuff. And that's typically what a lot of people really enjoy watching. So I don't get why it wouldn't be more openly received, I guess. But I can never really get my finger on it. In regards to some of the CG stuff, I know I'm kind of switching, like jumping around a little bit. We were talking earlier about how his work has always stood the test of time. Mm-hmm. And I think that when it comes to writing, I think that he writes his works in such a way where it's layered and you can look at it from different angles and there's meaning from different perspectives. That really shows how nuanced and how insightful he is on whatever subject he's talking about. But the things that I think stand the test of time the best are his works where he is given a ridiculous size budget, probably larger than it should be. And he puts every scrap of that into the visuals. So that way it looks like BVS looks absolutely, Man of Steel looks absolutely incredible, even compared to today's standards. But yeah, Rebel Moon is not going to stand up. Just from the trailers alone, it's not going to last very long as far as the visual quality of it. There are a lot of scenes in it where it does look a little weightless. It does look a little empty, a little video game-ish, as people say. And I tried to tell myself in the beginning, oh, well, that's kind of the point. Like this is what he intended to do. But then I thought about it and it's like, am I just coping? Because I would always say that, I would always say that. So I'm very concerned about that. And I think that's really going to have an impact on the rewatchability. I think a lot of Zack Snyder fans may say they will rewatch it in the future, but they're going to look back on it and they're probably going to just like, when was the last time you watched Guardians of Gahul? I mean, it's a great film, but it's like, you're not going to rewatch it just for the funsies. No, I watched Man of Steel millions of times. Right. So I think that's what's going to end up happening with this particular Zack Snyder film is that it's just going to be a Gahul.
I hope it's not, but you're right though. The last time I saw Hours of Gahul was the first time I saw it. And that was when it was on Netflix. I want to say 4 years ago or so. I saw it for the first time. And what's another one? Army of the Dead I've seen a few times since it released. That one I do enjoy a lot. But yeah, Hours of Gahul, Sucker Punch even, I've seen that 3 times.
I've seen that many times. Yeah.
But yeah, Hours of Gahul once. 300 I'll revisit. Obviously the DC stuff I'll revisit, including Watchmen.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope
Watchmen pushing it because it's long. And I tell you what, like people complain about length nowadays, which is hilarious. It's not the way it sounds. But they complain about length. There's obviously some legitimacy to that. I think that, obviously, there's a whole situation where people will watch like a TV show and they'll just like binge ridiculous amount of episodes with it. But it's kind of meant to pace itself in a different fashion. Whereas like, it's like you're taking breaks in between and it's made that way all the way down to the script. Like that's how it's actually structured. Whereas a TV show is not made that way. It's a marathon if you're running a long movie. So you get kind of exhausted by the end. So there is legitimacy to that complaint. I think it definitely is applicable to Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League. And Watchmen is a long one, especially if you watch the Ultimate Cut, It's not a very like fluffy show either. So it's pretty exhausting by the time you get done with it, Go ahead.
To touch on the visuals for Rebel Moon, I know Zach put up on Vero like just a few weeks before the trailer premiere that he was doing final touches on it, like something about the lighting or the grading, color grading they were doing. So I almost want to compare. So there's one scene that I know I had a problem with as far as the CG. Mm-hmm. Like the horses to me looked a little unfinished. That one scene where they're coming over the hill and then you see like the alien horses on there. Yeah. And then there's one scene where Anthony Hopkins' character, I think his name is Jimmy, where the camera is tracking, it's moving, and then Jimmy's head looks extra CG than normal. Like it's just kind of like, okay, I noticed that. But I'm curious, I want to see when the final cut does come out on Netflix, if there were any updates or changes, because I know he was doing some tweaks with the ships before this trailer came out, and obviously with the color grading. So I'd want to go back and compare some of these things to see if there were changes. I know for the Snyder Cut, it was a whole different situation, but even that had unfinished pieces in that awesome trailer compared to the final cut that came out on Max. But yeah, I think we want to see that.
That's another thing that kind of concerns me too, because it's like, remember when Marvel movies trailers would come out and we were talking about how terrible they looked, and the people would say, "Oh, well, it's because they haven't finished it yet,"
Yeah.
And then we would say, "Well, look at like, Man of Steel BVS trailer, like, and how amazing it looks like on the first trailer." It's like there's no excuse, And we would always use Zack's movies as a way to like debunk the idea that between the first trailer and the final trailer, or even the first trailer in the product, or even in some cases, if you really want to cope, the final trailer and the final product, that there would be some massive change that would make all the difference, And I don't know. That's a stretch. I mean, yeah, sure. The optimism in me wants to see that. Like, I want that reality to manifest, but is it going to happen? I mean, if Zack hasn't been able to pump out a product that's of the absolute highest quality in the final trailer, then what happened to Zack? What happened to the situation that he's in, that he can't do what he's done before with more money?
Well, we'll for sure find out in 2 weeks when we can actually see, oh shit, it's the exact same thing as the trailer. And then it's fine. Like, what I'm saying now is it at least on my end, it sounds negative that I'm talking about these 2 instances in the trailer that I'm like, the CG there looked a little spotty, but I'm nitpicking because I think the camera work is great. Obviously, we've got good star power behind it, people that he's worked with. There's none of these performances was I like, I don't know, at least from the trailer. So once I see the movie, I don't know for sure, but everything else I'm excited for. I'm excited for this sci-fi epic, what his quote unquote, even though it didn't start out as a Star Wars project, but sort of like what would a Star Wars by Zack kind of look like?
Yeah.
And we're going to get that. And then we get part 2 in April, which is awesome. So just 5 months away.
I would say that I don't know. I have to do some soul searching and to tell you if I'm being overly negative or if I have come to some sort of center after a period of time of being overly positive. But what I could say positively is that I am excited about it. And I think that I watch stuff with mediocre CG all the time. This is better than mediocre. It's not mediocre. It's not subpar. It's actually decent. It's just, it looks like a modern digital, very CG heavy film with an above average to great director. I mean, well, I don't know. I haven't come to the conclusion of where Zack is currently. I have to see the movie to find out, but an amazing director, So I think it's going to be really, really good. And to be frank, it's better than most things that are out. So for me to be so critical, it's only because I care about Zack's work so much. That's the only reason. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you too.
Yeah.
I know that you had seen the trailer initially, and you had some issues with it, and then you saw the breakdown from Zack, and that's something I did not watch. Was there something in between there when he did the trailer breakdown that made you kind of see things in a new way when you went back and saw the trailer again? Well, what was it exactly about the breakdown?
Yeah, I do actually. I do agree with that. Well, it was just how much practical effects he used. I guess I didn't see the practical effects. So in my mind, I was being like one of those, angry YouTube critics or whatever, angry YouTube critic number 10. And I was like, oh, everything is CG. It's all, I was thinking, but then I look in the breakdown, like, oh, that was actually a practical effect. And it was just the lighting and the post effects that made it look that way. And I'm just projecting essentially, I looked at it with a little bit of a different lens, and because part of me is like, okay, Zack has always had this sort of aesthetic. A lot of Zack Snyder fans will call it painterly, which I agree with to a large extent. And other people call that like, CG mess. I would say that when I was looking at this, I was trying to figure out how much of this painterly look that we've always claimed that he has is this versus just a little bit cheap CG that's trying to be like really great, but it's not quite there yet, uncanny valley sort of thing. And when I watched the breakdown, it just tilted me more to the stylistic as opposed to the CG, the proper CG, a little bit more than I was before. So that's the best way for me to explain it.
I'm going to watch the breakdown now that you mentioned it, because now I'm curious as to what was CG, what wasn't, what is there like a big ship out there somewhere that you can actually maybe go visit sometime? So I'm curious about all that. That's a good point. These people that have gone to these screenings have seen the movie. I've of course spun it as I do as a positive for the, I'm playing the game that Warner Brothers and all them used to do, Disney especially. They still play. And
someone's got to do it.
Yeah, and reviews are great, Millennial Mike. Initial reviews are amazing. They're calling it a modern classic, calling it one of Zack's best. People that have gone and seen the movie, overwhelmingly positive thoughts. This is when reviews matter. when it counts for my agenda.
No, I feel you. I wanted to succeed, and this is the thing. Is like I think about this too. So I mentioned it to you before, but I was talking to some friends, and I have a few friends who like Zack Snyder's Justice League as their favorite Zack Snyder's film. And I think about this, and I'm like, okay, I know some like longtime Zack Snyder fans who legitimately think that Zack Snyder's Justice League is his best film. But then I know these people aren't coming from the same space. They are coming from a different. So what's their context? What's their path? And a lot of it has to do with this narrative that he's lightening up the characters as it was always supposed to happen. And you're coming to some sort of like synthesis, and there's hope and there's optimism and there's more comic accuracy and all these different things that we used to have to deflect. And this is the way that he fixed. It's almost like the rise of Skywalker of Zack Snyder almost, and a lot of people treat this, except more, because even that had a negative, a negative narrative going on for it. But that's kind of the impression I got from a lot of Zack antis that liked Zack Snyder's Justice League. So the same goes for Rebel Moon. Like if everyone is like, oh yeah, it's super positive. Okay. But just because you're happy that you like this movie, I don't necessarily, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be happy that you're happy that you like a Zack movie. Like I'm not just like, oh, all positives, always good. I believe in positive review bombing. That's how things get trapped in a negative feedback loop. That's why Disney with the MCU is where they are right now.
Oh yeah, I said, that ain't for us. This is for that whole. It's for the Joe Schmo that says, "I heard it was good." That's the only person that's for. At least when I make those little graphics.
Yeah, and so that's why I try to be careful with my positive and negative criticism, because I think of it all as a correcting force. And like, do I want to correct it one way or the other? I mean, in the end of the day, I'm a drop in the ocean, and that's very depressing for me. But
I think we have more influence than we think.
I try to be principled about it, as opposed to not worrying about whether it's really going to have an impact, but just doing what I think I should do regardless of the effects.
Well, at least the brokehead on the other side will know for sure our honest thoughts when it comes to Rebel Moon in a couple of weeks when we do an episode just on that film. It won't be anything about other people or anything. It'll be what we actually think about this movie. And then eventually part 2, which I'm hoping I'm desperate to see based on part 1, but we'll find out very soon. The Godzilla trailer as the last bit that we're going to discuss on this episode. Not trailer, but Godzilla -1. We both saw a Godzilla film this week. You saw the latest one, -1. And please give us your spoiler-free impressions on this, because I know people are Godzilla heavy right now with that terrible new trailer that came out. The Monarch show on Apple, which is apparently good. I know Bobby likes it. And then now straight from Toho, Japan, Godzilla -1. So what are your spoiler-free impressions of this film?
I really enjoyed the last Toho Godzilla movie, which was Shin Godzilla. You on Discord just before this podcast stated that it wasn't, in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's not my cup of tea.
Yeah. Which, now I think that this would be. This is a little bit more of a straightforward monster movie. That other movie was quite psychological and a little bit more of like a political satire. And it had like a lot of kind of more high concept stuff going on. Whereas this one is a little bit more of like what you would call, and I don't want this to be overwrought, but like a human drama with Godzilla also included. And that is true. It spends a lot of time in the beginning of the movie dealing with the main characters, their personal life struggles, their relationships, and their doubts, their grief, their tragedy, their hopes and dreams, and all that kind of stuff. And it really gets you invested in the characters. I remember watching a lot of Godzilla movies where even the Toho ones, where Godzilla is like just this confused animal or something like that. And, the government, they're just wanting to destroy it. They don't understand and all this kind of stuff. Right. And I obviously, when I was young, I wasn't really thinking about all the nuances and the details. And I was just going, no, Godzilla, don't hurt Godzilla, Yep. And later on, as I got older and older, I kind of had a taste for something different that I think the Toho movies really gave me, which was the idea that, we need good and bad. We really do. Like, good and bad is important. And the monster movie really is so powerful because it encapsulates fear in a good way. Like, there are things that fear brings people together to stop. And this movie, there are all these disaffected people. They've been ravaged by war and they all have their own personal things going on, that baggage and whatnot. And they're all trying to move on. And Godzilla kind of acts as an allegory for this trauma that they're all going through. And when they defeat, well, is that a spoiler? Well, okay. In every Godzilla movie you've ever watched, they where Godzilla's the bad guy, they defeat Godzilla, and then there's like a heart or something like that. It's like boom, 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 and then it's like, and then he's like the next movie, So I'm sorry, you can bleep that out if you need to.
They're free of Godzilla in some way in every one of those Godzilla movies. You're right.
But Godzilla didn't destroy Japan, so that's a spoiler.
Okay, well, yeah, because that might have happened in this one. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, you can do what you got to do with that. I'm sorry, but the point being is that you care about the people. You actually care about the people, and you realize that Godzilla must be stopped. He's not someone to be sympathized with, because any more so than a bomb that's being dropped on you should be sympathized with, And I think that's important to have. I mean, listen, if you want to have your social commentaries about, ecology and animals and PETA and whatever, then go for it. There's plenty of those, but this is an actual kaiju monster movie, where monsters inadvertently killing people, destroying people who don't deserve to die, and they're fighting back with everything they can as a last resort to save the people that they care about. And that's what this movie is. And it's really powerful, and it's got an ending that you're not going to expect. And I think you're going to love it.
I'm going to try to watch it while it's still in theaters, but if not, I'll go the voodoo route like I did with Shin Godzilla and eventually watch it. I'm going to see it. I'm a Godzilla guy. And well, I say that, but I'm not going to see that second Godzilla vs. Kong film. So I guess I'm not. But
King Kong with the Infinity Gun. You have to be kidding me. I'm just, oh my God. Oh my God. Hollywood has gone too far. If you haven't already found that out.
And here's the thing, like, I saw the perfect post about this on X of like, how do you go from Godzilla 2013 to
with Gareth Edwards to
this?
Well, like, you know why? We did this. Us whining and complaining about the human drama, and us whining and complaining about how you can't see Godzilla. He's enveloped. You can't even.
Too much darkness, right?
Too much darkness, dude. I don't have any sympathy for Hollywood, for Disney, for the Warner Brothers any longer. I don't have any sympathy for this kind of audience member either. It's like you caused this. This is your fault. You only watched Marvel movies, and you rejected Man of Steel in 2013. You rejected Gareth Edwards' Man of Steel in 2013. You rejected all these movies, and now we're getting exactly what you asked for. So that's my bit.
Yeah, well, that's what they are doing, absolutely. And one of the things I saw though was someone said, well, the Toho films also got sillier as they went on, and I'm like, this is a completely different animal. Like, it's not done for the same reasons in the same way.
Okay, well, yeah, I think they've kind of returned to a far more serious tone and take with their new stuff, and perhaps that's because they wanted to make an antidote for what Hollywood was doing. Maybe they're not even really considering what Hollywood is doing. I don't know. The thing, even when things are silly, Japan has a whole different rubric, a whole different understanding and method to how they do their comedy and whatnot. So even that works in its absurdity. Whereas the kind of absurdity that Hollywood makes is kind of like a, how do you do, fellow kids absurdity. It just doesn't work.
It's unfortunate, but I'm glad that we're getting Toho Godzilla films. I still have my Godzilla Netflix trilogy I can go back and watch. And hopefully, and yeah, that's it. I'm done. I'm done with these Warner Brothers King Kong Godzilla movies. which is sad because I liked the King Kong movie. I don't know if you enjoyed it, but I did enjoy it.
I did. Well, the movie was shot very well. It was a full blown movie, and nowadays it's like. Do you remember Rampage, the video game?
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to like make Rampage, but with like the kaiju, like the Godzilla and King Kong.
Are they going to fist bump at the end?
No. Probably.
Are they going to
They'll probably dab. Oh my, dude, great minds, man. Great minds.
So you heard it from Millennial Mike. Go watch Godzilla -1. Do not go see Godzilla vs. Kong 2. I mean, unless you like the MCU, then you might enjoy it. Godzilla -1. Yeah, I still love the premise. I say that to Kelly all the time. I repeat it to her of like, I love this premise though. And I don't know if this is what the movie is because I haven't seen it, but of like Japan's lowest moment, right? They're recovering from this war, these explosions, this loss of life. They're at a bottom. And then Godzilla comes along and goes, guess what, motherfuckers?
Yeah. Well, and you're really, so I think when I read that synopsis and I went into the movie, it didn't fully encapsulate. It is an accurate representation, but it doesn't fully, because, okay, for instance, the movie takes place several years after the bomb drop. So it's not like right literally, they're not like shuffling through the ruffle and then Godzilla stomping on them while they're already.
That would have been, damn, that would have been really funny. Like how much worse did it get?
The human drama comes in because the idea is that this is a post-war Japan and people are suffering from the trauma and from the inner demons and whatnot of that. So the main character is he's a soldier, a kamikaze soldier specifically, who shirked his responsibility. He left before, he was being dispatched and he actually left to this island and didn't go into battle, right? And he's living with this. And then other people have other issues, they're going through, but all this has to do with their relationship to the war. And Godzilla kind of just recatalyzes that, brings these things back up for them. It's more of an emotional reemergence as opposed to like, oh, another bomb is being dropped in the form of Godzilla right after the first one. It's not quite like that. It has a lot to do with the war, but more so on a personal scale. And I guess the personal is also the larger picture too, because it shows a few different people and how they deal with it. And that helps you understand how a lot of people might feel at the time. So it's not like this grand thing. It's pretty personal.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. That kind of sets my expectations a little bit differently now when I eventually go in and see it. Millennial Mike, I want to thank you for helping out with this Zack Snyder discussion, especially as we build up into the release of Rebel Moon. And if the Brokehead Corps want to continue the discussion with you, where can they find you?
Discord at The Reasons We're Broke, The Exiles Network, Lazy Gaming Guys. Lately, keep looking on Substack. I need inspiration to write something. Like when I'm going to write something, it's going to be pretty audacious. It's going to be pretty. I'm going to try to buy it off a lot, but I haven't quite come to it yet. I have a few things that I can work on, but I hasn't catalyzed yet. But keep watching that. I want to write some more essays that are kind of comprehensive, like the last one, or I don't know. I thought it was comprehensive, but yeah. So keep looking at my Substack. I believe it's Substack .Millennial Mike. Let's see, millennialmike.substack.com. So yeah, check that out.
There you go. And this week, as always, you can find us at thereasonsthatbroke.com. But if you want to be heard on the show, head on over to speakpipe.com/thereasonsimmbroke. You can leave us a voicemail. There is a link in the description of today's episode, 90 seconds or less. So if it's a comment, a question, if it's your impressions on Rebel Moon, or if you want to watch the movie in a couple weeks and let us know in under 90 seconds what you thought of Rebel Moon, head on over to speakpipe.com/thereasonsimmbroke, and you may be heard right here on the show. But thank you once again, Millennial Mike, for helping out this week, and to you on the other side for joining us. I've been Daniel, joined by Millennial Mike, and Brokehead Corps. All will be well.